He built a billion-dollar empire, then 5 strangers tried to sell him a toy car to save their dying mother, and shattered his world with one truth: she's our mom. You're our dad. Before we get started, leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from so we can say hello to you. Now, on to the story. From the top floor of the Morgan Motors headquarters, the city of Chicago stretched out like a meticulously crafted model beneath Nathaniel Blake's polished leather shoes. The skyline, dusted in early December snow, reflected off the glass walls of his penthouse office, a palace in the clouds for a man who had conquered nearly everything. At 45, Nathaniel was the undisputed king of luxury cars in North America, his dealership sprawled across the country, his name synonymous with wealth, speed, and precision. Yet none of it, not even the gleaming Ferrari in his private showroom, could fill the ever-widening void in his chest. He stood in silence, fingers loosely holding a tumbler of water, staring down at the bustling plaza below. People scurried like ants, some seeking warmth, others chasing time. It was business as usual. Until it wasn't. A movement at the dealership entrance caught his eye. Nathaniel narrowed his gaze, his posture straightening. 5 small figures, bundled in thin mile sets, were standing defiantly at the main doors of Morgan Motors' flagship showroom. They looked no older than 10. What were children doing there in this cold? He squinted, watching as his head of security, Frank, stepped into view. Nathaniel had known Frank for over a decade, ex-military, no nonsense, and never one to tolerate loiterers. Yet the children didn't run. They didn't flinch. They stood their ground. Nathaniel's brows furrowed. Something wasn't right. He crossed the room in 4 swift strides, pressed the intercom. "Get me Frank," he said, voice crisp. Seconds later, the voice buzzed through. "Mr. Morgan? I was just about to call. We've got some kids camped outside, trying to sell some kind of toy. I've asked them to leave 3 times, but they keep coming back. Stubborn little things." Nathaniel's eyes remained locked on the scene below. "Don't send them away." There was a pause. "Sir? I said, don't send them away. I'm coming down." Even as he ended the call, Nathaniel questioned himself. What was he doing? Since when did he personally handle minor disturbances? Yet his feet were already moving toward the private elevator. Something deep inside him, something he didn't recognize, had stirred. As the elevator descended, Nathaniel stared at his reflection in the mirrored walls. Tailored suit. Watch worth more than some homes. Jaw tight with control. Yet behind his steel exterior, there was an unease he couldn't shake. Those children, their faces, even from 20 stories up, had pierced something old and buried. The elevator chimed. Ground floor. As the doors parted, he strode past rows of high-end cars gleaming under showroom lights. The cold hit him as he pushed through the glass doors, brutal, immediate, and sobering. There they were. 5 children, shoulder to shoulder against the wind, holding a box between them. "Mr. Morgan, you didn't have to come down," Frank began, but Nathaniel raised a hand, silencing him. He stepped closer. 5 identical faces turned toward him. Wide eyes. Caramel hair tousled by the wind. Faces too young to look so determined. Nathaniel's breath caught. A strange pressure tightened in his chest. "I hear you've been trying to sell something," he said, his voice softer than it had been in years. One child, the tallest of the group, stepped forward, his chin high. "We're sorry for the trouble, sir. We just need to sell this." He held out a small object wrapped carefully in cloth. Nathaniel unwrapped it with gloved hands. His blood turned to ice. It was a vintage Morgan Aeromax. A limited edition collector's piece. The exact model he'd given to Claire Bennett 10 years ago, the night before he left her behind. The world tilted. And in that moment, Nathaniel Blake, CEO, billionaire, untouchable, felt the first crack splinter across the empire he had built to protect himself from a truth too painful to face. Snowflakes drifted lazily against the tall windows of Morgan Motors' flagship showroom, but Nathaniel Blake hardly noticed the winter chill pressing against the glass. He stood like a statue on the top floor of his dealership tower, watching as people and traffic moved like ants below. The city he ruled pulsed with its usual urgency, yet something strange tugged at his attention, a disturbance near the main entrance. From this height, most details blurred into motion. But 5 small figures huddled near the showroom steps stood out like a ripple against still water. Nathaniel narrowed his eyes. Even through the falling snow, he could make out their matching size, their refusal to leave despite the bitter wind and the looming presence of a security guard. "Frank," Nathaniel muttered, reaching for the intercom on his desk. "Yes, Mr. Morgan," his head of security answered almost instantly. "There's a group of kids outside." "What's going on?" Frank sighed on the other end. "Just 5 kids trying to sell some toys out front. Told them to leave, twice. Persistent little things." Nathaniel's brow furrowed. "Don't send them away again." A beat of silence followed. "Sir?" "I'll come down," Nathaniel said, surprising even himself. The elevator ride was unnaturally quiet. As he descended floor by floor, Nathaniel questioned the impulse that pulled him from his empire. He wasn't the kind of man to involve himself in minor disturbances. His life was driven by metrics, by outcomes. He'd built Morgan Motors from scratch. He'd survived brutal markets, hostile takeovers, even heartbreak, but this? Something about those children unsettled him. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the gleaming expanse of the showroom floor. Rows of luxury cars gleamed under polished lights, sleek, powerful machines built to impress. Nathaniel barely looked at them. His gaze was locked on the front entrance, where the glass doors blurred with condensation from the cold. Outside, 5 children stood close together, their arms wrapped tightly around themselves. Nathaniel stepped through the doors and was immediately hit by the brutal December wind. The cold sliced through his tailored suit, but he didn't flinch. Frank stood nearby, confusion etched into his features. "Mr. Morgan, you didn't need." Nathaniel waved him off, already focused on the children. They looked up at him in unison, 5 nearly identical faces with warm brown eyes and tousled caramel hair. Their cheeks were flushed from the cold, but what struck Nathaniel most was the look in their eyes. Not fear. Not defiance. Just hope. "I hear you've been trying to sell something," he said, his voice gentler than usual. One of the boys stepped forward. He couldn't have been older than 10, but he stood like someone used to shielding others. "We're sorry if we caused trouble, sir," the boy said calmly. "We just wanted to sell this." He held up a small object in both hands, a vintage toy car. Nathaniel took a knee, the snow soaking into his pants forgotten. He reached for the toy, handling it with care. It was a Morgan Aeromax miniature, limited edition, perfectly preserved. And unmistakably familiar. His breath caught. He had given this exact model to Claire Bennett. 10 years ago. The night before he walked away from her. Before he left behind everything that might have mattered. "What's your mother's name?" Nathaniel asked, voice tightening. All 5 answered at once. "Claire Bennett." The toy nearly slipped from his fingers. The world around him narrowed into a blur of sound and memory. He saw her face in flashes. Her tears. Her laughter. The fear in her eyes when she'd told him she was pregnant, and the shame in his heart when he turned away from her and never looked back. Now, 5 small strangers stood before him, strangers who weren't strangers at all. They were his. And they were trying to sell his past for the medicine their mother needed to survive. Nathaniel stepped through the dealership's front doors, the bitter wind slashing across his face like a reprimand from the past. His tailored wool coat offered no warmth for what he was about to face. There, huddled together just beyond the showroom's gleaming entrance, were 5 children. Identical in appearance. Each no more than 10 years old. Their cheeks were flushed red from the cold, their milesets thin, too thin for the brutal Chicago December. But it wasn't just their shivering forms that stopped Nathaniel in his tracks, it was their faces. 5 pairs of warm brown eyes looked up at him, hesitant but unafraid. 5 heads of caramel-colored hair, tousled by the wind. 5 small bodies stood shoulder to shoulder, their chins lifted, their resolve far too strong for children their age. Something about them struck him deep, an almost primal thud in his chest. A recognition. A warning. A whisper he wasn't ready to hear. Frank, his head of security, shifted nervously behind him. "Mr. Morgan, you didn't have to come down yourself," he muttered. "They've been trying to sell toys all afternoon. I told them to leave. They won't." Nathaniel ignored him. His eyes locked with theirs. "I hear you've been trying to sell something," he said softly, his voice no longer the commanding tone of a CEO but something gentler, unsure, curious, almost human. One of the children, the boy who stood in the center, stepped forward with the quiet authority of someone far older than his years. "We're sorry for bothering your business, sir," he said, his voice tight but steady. "We just wanted to sell this." He held out a small object wrapped in a scarf. Nathaniel knelt, ignoring the snow seeping through the knees of his designer trousers. When the boy unwrapped it, Nathaniel froze. In the boy's outstretched hand was a vintage toy car. A Morgan Aeromax. Limited edition. Midnight blue, chrome trim, the leather interior etched in tiny detail. His breath caught. He hadn't seen that model in over a decade, hadn't thought of it since the night he gifted it to Claire Bennett. His Claire. The Leo night she told him she was pregnant. The Leo night he'd disappeared. "Where did you get this?" he asked, the words catching like gravel in his throat. "It belonged to our dad," the girl among them said quietly, her voice shaking only slightly. "It's the only thing we have from him." Nathaniel looked at her, really looked. The gentle arch of her brows. The dimple that appeared when she offered a tentative smile. And suddenly, the wind wasn't the only thing leaving him breathless. "What are your names?" he asked, though his soul already knew. "Luca. Miles. Leo. Ezra," said the boys one by one. "And I'm Aria," the girl added, clutching the toy tighter now. His heart slammed against his ribs, a drumbeat of disbelief and recognition. 5 names. 5 faces. 5 echoes of a love he never had the courage to fight for. "And your mother's name?" They all answered together, like a chorus written by fate. "Claire Bennett." Nathaniel's vision blurred. The car nearly slipped from his hand. His breath came short, shallow. Everything around him, the snow, the city noise, the gleaming showroom, faded into static. He was staring at the very proof of what he'd run from. Of what Claire had faced alone. Of the future he had once rejected, now standing in front of him in 5 living, breathing reflections of himself and the woman he had never stopped loving. His voice barely made it out. I think we should talk more about your mother." And though his face remained calm, Nathaniel Blake knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing in his world would ever be the Leo again. The warmth of the dealership's interior clashed sharply with the cold truth pressing against Nathaniel Blake's chest as he ushered the children inside. The moment the glass doors shut behind them, muffling the howl of winter wind, Nathaniel could feel his world beginning to tilt. The showroom, polished, pristine, and stacked with 6-figure machines, suddenly felt hollow, like a monument to a life built on the wrong foundation. The quintuplets, Luca, Miles, Leo, Ezra, and Aria, stood close together, their eyes wide but steady. They weren't intimidated by the luxury or the man who owned it all. They were too used to disappointment, too familiar with struggle. And that quiet resilience in their small, identical faces unnerved him more than any boardroom challenge ever had. Nathaniel led them to the executive lounge, bypassing stunned employees who had never seen their cold, clockwork-precise boss escort children through the building. He waved off questions with a look, his jaw tight, his mind racing. "Please," he said softly, gesturing to the plush leather couch that had once hosted celebrities and CEOs. "Make yourselves comfortable." The children hesitated only a moment before sitting, their movements hesitant, almost rehearsed. Nathaniel knelt before them, not caring that his custom slacks were soaking up the snow melting from their shoes, and gently asked, "Would you like some hot chocolate?" At first, no one responded. Then Arya nodded, just once, and the others followed with barely their gestures. He called his assistant, his voice rougher than intended. "Get hot chocolate. Whipped cream. Sprinkles. Now." The room was silent again, save for the distant hum of display lights and the distant sound of the city beyond the showroom windows. Nathaniel's eyes fell to the toy car resting in Arya's lap, small, carefully preserved, and suddenly much more than a childhood trinket. "I hear you've been trying to sell something," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "That car, where did it come from?" Luca, who Nathaniel was beginning to understand was the protective one, spoke up. "Our mom kept it in a box. Said it was the only thing our dad ever gave her." Nathaniel's breath caught. Miles added quietly, "We figured maybe it was worth something. She needs medicine. And we don't have enough." It wasn't just the story, it was the way they told it. Matter of fact. Without begging. Without blame. Nathaniel reached for the toy. As his fingers brushed its surface, he recognized the model instantly, an original Morgan Aeromax, a limited collector's edition. There were only 10 in the world. He had given one to Claire Bennett the night of their graduation, before everything unraveled. "What's your mother's name?" he asked, though his pulse already gave him the answer. All 5 children answered in perfect unison. "Claire Bennett." The toy nearly slipped from his hand. A full 10 seconds passed before he could speak, and when he did, his voice cracked under the weight of disbelief. "That was, a long time ago." Ezra, the quiet one, noticed his reaction. "Are you okay, mister?" Nathaniel forced a nod, but inside, everything was cracking. 5 children. All around 10 years old. All with eyes like his. The timeline. The toy. The name. He hadn't just abandoned a woman. He had unknowingly walked away from an entire family. And now, by pure chance, or perhaps fate, they were standing in front of him, selling the only memory he had left of the woman he once loved, just to keep her alive. Nathaniel looked at them again, really looked, and saw what he had failed to see at first glance, his past, his legacy, his guilt, staring right back at him. Everything he thought he knew about his life collapsed in that moment. Nothing would ever be the Leo again. The snow fell harder as Nathaniel Blake stood outside the glass doors of his showroom, the bitter December wind cutting through his tailored suit. The quintuplets stood huddled together, 5 small, shivering bodies in worn mile sets that looked 2 winters too old. But it wasn't the cold or their poverty that stopped Nathaniel in his tracks, it was their eyes. 5 identical gazes stared back at him, equal parts fear and fire. It was unnerving, and familiar. Frank, his head of security, stepped beside him. "Mr. Morgan, you really didn't need to come down. I can have them moved along." Again. Nathaniel shook his head without looking at him. "No. Let me speak with them." He took a step forward, his expensive leather shoes crunching on salted pavement. "I hear you've been trying to sell something," he asked, his voice softer than usual. The tallest of the children, a boy with wind-reddened cheeks and a protective stance, stepped forward. "We're sorry for bothering your business, sir," he said, his tone polite but steady. "We're just trying to sell this." He held out a small object with both hands, like it was a treasure. Nathaniel crouched down, ignoring the sting of snow soaking into his slacks. The boy placed the item in his palm, a toy car. Not just any car. A pristine, vintage Morgan Aeromax model. Chrome trim, ivory detail, every detail lovingly preserved. Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. He turned it over slowly, brushing his thumb along the undercarriage. The craftsmanship was unmistakable, custom-made, limited edition. One of only 100. And more than that, it was his. The exact replica he had commissioned and gifted to Claire Bennett the night before graduation, the night before he left her behind and disappeared into the world to chase his ambition. His heart thudded against his ribs like a warning drum. "Where did you get this?" he asked hoarsely, eyes fixed on the car. Another child, a girl this time, no older than the others, answered. "It was our dad's," she said, gripping the sleeves of her too-thin mile set. "It's the only thing we have from him." Nathaniel looked up, his eyes locking on all 5 faces, so alike they could have been copy-pasted versions of one another. Their caramel-colored hair whipped in the wind. Their brown eyes, his brown eyes, stared back at him with a mixture of trust and hesitation. It was as if the universe had slapped him across the face. He swallowed hard. "What's your mother's name?" "Claire Bennett," they said in unison. The toy car nearly slipped from his hand. For a moment, the world spun, the sounds of traffic muffled, the cold forgotten, time itself suspended. Claire. 10 years ago. Her bright smile. Her terrified confession that she might be pregnant. His refusal to face it. The way he packed a bag and left without looking back. "Sir, are you okay?" one of the boys asked, his voice laced with concern. Nathaniel stood slowly, still clutching the car like a lifeline. "Yes," he managed, his voice strained. But inside, something was crumbling, his carefully curated world, his illusion of control, his denial. He looked at them again, at Luca, Miles, Leo, Ezra, and the only girl, Arya. Names that belonged to his children. Children he'd never known existed. He looked down at the car again, a piece of the past he thought he'd buried. But it was never buried, it had simply waited. Preserved. Protected. Just like Claire had protected their children. His children. "I think," Nathaniel said carefully, "I'd like to buy this car." He took a shaky breath. "And maybe, you could tell me more about your mother." And just like that, the life Nathaniel Blake had meticulously built began to crack, making way for something far messier, far more real, and far more important than anything he'd ever owned. The elevator ride felt endless. As it jerked to a halt on the 3rd floor of a weathered apartment building, Nathaniel Blake, once the unshakable king of chrome and glass, felt his pulse thunder in his ears. The hallway smelled faintly of old wood and time. Paint peeled from the walls in lazy curls, and the floorboards creaked with each uncertain step he took behind the 5 children that now bore a shocking truth he was still trying to digest. Luca, the self-appointed leader, wore a plastic key on a string around his neck. He stopped in front of a door marked 3C, unlocked it with practiced ease, and turned back to Nathaniel with a simple, "She's probably resting. We'll go slow." The door opened to a small, neatly kept apartment. It wasn't luxurious by any means, second-hand furniture, a threadbare rug, a faint scent of disinfectant, but everything inside spoke of care. Of love. The walls were lined with photographs, 5 children in every stage of life, always with a smiling woman at the center. Her arms were always around them, her eyes shining with strength. Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. Arya's voice rang out gently, "Mom. We're home. And, we brought someone. He bought Dad's car." Silence answered for a moment, until a voice, soft but weathered, floated from the back room. "Come in. I'll be right out." Nathaniel wasn't sure what he expected. Certainly not this. When Claire Bennett emerged from the hallway, she didn't walk, she shuffled, a frail figure with oxygen tubes tucked beneath her nose and skin far paler than he remembered. The vibrant woman he had once loved now looked 10 years older than her age. Her body was thin, her frame delicate, but her eyes, those eyes hadn't changed. Ocean blue. Piercing. Familiar. She saw him, and froze. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, time rewound a decade and collapsed upon them like a wave. She gripped the doorframe to steady herself. Nathaniel's mouth opened, but no words came. What could he say? "Hi, I abandoned you 10 years ago. Turns out I left 5 children behind." "Children," she said, voice steady despite the oxygen hissing gently from her machine. "Go wash up before dinner. I'd like a moment with our guest." The quintuplets hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave, especially Luca, who hovered until Claire gave him a nod only a mother could give. With 5 pairs of curious eyes reluctantly retreating down the hallway, silence settled over the small living room like dust. "Hello, Claire," Nathaniel said, his voice barely a whisper. "Nathaniel Blake." She didn't need to shout. Her voice landed with the weight of a slammed door. "I see you've met your children." It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. The room seemed too small for the chasm between them. Nathaniel felt the press of the years, the guilt that had clawed its way to the surface from somewhere deep and buried. Claire's shoulders sagged with exhaustion, but the fire in her eyes remained. "Why are you here?" she asked, quiet fury simmering beneath every syllable. "Why now?" "I didn't know," he said hoarsely. "I swear, Claire. I didn't know you were pregnant. I didn't know about them." "Would it have made a difference?" she asked coldly. He didn't answer. Because he wasn't sure. And that silence was louder than any apology. She coughed then, hard, painful, bending at the waist, and he instinctively stepped forward to help. She held up a hand. "Don't. I don't need you to rescue me." Nathaniel froze. Shame wrapped around his throat like a noose. "I didn't come to rescue you," he managed. "I came, because I saw them. And I realized I'd made the worst mistake of my life." Claire looked at him, really looked at him. "You made your choice 10 years ago, Nathaniel. You walked away. I raised them. I carried the cost, every night, every fever, every birthday. You don't just show up and fix that with a limousine ride and a blank check." Her voice cracked with the weight of years, and Nathaniel finally saw it all, the loneliness, the bravery, the cost. But what he didn't see, yet, was whether there was room for him in the family he never knew he had. Claire stood in the middle of her small, cluttered living room like a ghost from Nathaniel's past, except now, she was painfully real. Her body was thinner than he remembered, her skin pale, stretched too tightly over cheekbones once vibrant with laughter. The oxygen tube beneath her nose was a stark reminder of just how close she was to the edge. But it was her eyes that gutted him, those Leo brilliant blue eyes, sharp and unwavering, filled with 10 years of fury and betrayal. "How dare you walk into our lives now," she whispered, her voice rasping with emotion and illness. It wasn't a scream, no, that would have been easier. It was quiet. Controlled. And far more devastating. Nathaniel couldn't speak. He stood frozen, just inside the doorway, guilt roaring through him like a tidal wave. 10 years, Nathaniel. 10 years of nothing, she continued, her voice shaking. No phone call. No letter. Not even a rumor that you were still alive out there. And now you show up at my door with my children at your side and think, what? That you can just waltz back in because you have money and a guilty conscience? "I didn't know," he said hoarsely, stepping forward. "Claire, I swear to you, I didn't know about the children." She laughed then, bitter and hollow, and it quickly turned into a choking cough that doubled her over. Without thinking, Nathaniel rushed to steady her, but she jerked away violently, one arm bracing against the wall as she tried to catch her breath. I don't need your help, she said between gasps, her voice thinner now, but no less cutting. Not now. Not after all this time. Yes, you do, Nathaniel said gently. Not for me. Not for the past. For them. Claire's shoulders sagged slightly at the mention of the children. She turned her face toward the kitchen where their laughter filtered faintly down the hallway, and for a moment, her strength seemed to falter. They've managed just fine without your money, she said quietly. Have they? Nathaniel asked softly, his eyes sweeping over the worn carpet, the fraying couch, the cracked linoleum. Have you? He didn't mean it as an attack, but her lips pressed into a thin line. We've done the best we could with what we had. I can see that. But you shouldn't have had to. Her eyes snapped back to his, and for the first time, he saw the vulnerability beneath the steel. What do you want, Nathaniel? She asked. Why are you really here? He swallowed hard. To help. The children came to my dealership trying to sell a toy car. My toy car. The one I gave you after graduation. When they said your name, everything changed. I couldn't walk away again. Not this time. Claire sank slowly onto the couch, her movements careful, her breathing still shallow. She looked exhausted, like she'd been carrying the weight of the world alone for far too long. And maybe she had. They don't know who you are, she said finally. They think you're just some man who bought their toy car and offered kindness. If you plan on walking away again, don't let them get attached. I'm not walking away, Nathaniel said, his voice steady, his jaw clenched. I don't know what the future looks like, or how to fix what I broke, but I'm here now. And I'm staying. Claire looked at him for a long moment, as if testing the truth of his words. Then, quietly, she spoke with the fierce clarity of a mother who had built a world from dust and determination. Then you better mean it. Because if you break their hearts. I swear, Nathaniel, I won't let you come back a second time. The words hung in the air, sharp and final. And Nathaniel Blake, for the first time in his life, understood exactly what was at stake. The soft chime of the doorbell sliced through the quiet tension hanging in Claire's small apartment. Nathaniel turned away from the window where he'd been watching snow coat the fire escape like a slow erasure, and opened the door. A composed woman in a dark overcoat stood there, medical bag in one hand, stethoscope looped neatly around her neck. Dr. Natalie Kim, she introduced herself crisply. You must be Mr. Morgan. Nathaniel nodded, stepping aside. Thank you for coming on such short notice. I was told it was urgent. It is. Claire sat on the worn couch, already pale, her body frail beneath a blanket as 5 worried pairs of eyes flicked between her and the unfamiliar doctor. Her oxygen tube hissed quietly, a sound that now seemed deafening. Children, she said gently, please give the doctor and me a moment. No, Luca said stubbornly, crossing his arms, his jaw clenched. We stay. Dr. Chen looked between them. They can stay for now, she said, then knelt beside Claire with practiced gentleness. Let's take a look, Ms. Taylor. As the examination progressed, Nathaniel stood nearby, hands in fists, jaw tight. He could see how Claire tried to stay composed, how she smiled at the children between labored breaths. But he could also see how thin her wrists were, how her shoulders trembled beneath the blanket, how every breath was a battle. After a series of questions and a brief listening to Claire's lungs, Dr. Chen turned to Nathaniel, motioning him toward the kitchen. He followed, though his feet felt like stone. What's your assessment? He asked, voice low but urgent. Dr. Chen glanced toward the living room where the quintuplets huddled around their mother like satellites. Her pulmonary fibrosis is significantly advanced. Frankly, I don't know how she's still on her feet. Nathaniel's breath caught. What does she need? Immediate hospitalization, Dr. Chen said without hesitation. She's been self-medicating, rationing prescriptions. That's dangerous, deadly. Her oxygen levels are unstable, and without proper treatment, we're talking weeks, not months. Weeks. The word hit like a punch to his chest. I'll cover everything, Nathaniel said at once. Specialists, private transport, the best hospital in the state. Just tell me what it takes. Dr. Chen's expression softened, but her tone remained clinical. This isn't just about money, Mr. Morgan. This is about time. And strength. She's been carrying the weight of 5 children alone while her body failed her. Nathaniel stared past her, through the cracked doorway into the dim apartment, at Claire surrounded by their children. The girl, Arya, held her mother's hand like it was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. I've already called for medical transport, Dr. Chen added. It'll be here in 15 minutes. She'll need essentials packed. Nathaniel gave a silent nod and moved quickly toward Claire's room. Inside, he found her sitting on the edge of the bed, oxygen mask now in place, her body shaking but her spine straight. Arya was folding clothes into a small overnight bag with trembling hands. The ambulance is coming, Nathaniel said softly. Claire nodded. Then, with great effort, turned to Arya. Sweetheart, can you check if my insurance card is in my purse by the door? After Arya left, Claire's gaze pinned him. The children can't stay alone. I'll arrange everything, Nathaniel replied. A hotel near the hospital. No, her voice was firmer than he'd expected. They need routine. School. Familiarity. Nathaniel hesitated for only a moment. They can stay at my house. It's close to their school. I'll make it work. Claire's laugh was hollow. Your house? The Morgan mansion with 5 children? They're my children too, Nathaniel said quietly, the word strange and raw on his tongue. He hadn't earned the title. Not yet. But he would. Claire didn't argue further. Outside, the sirens began to grow louder. Inside, the weight of the past 10 years settled like a storm over all of them. And in that moment, Nathaniel Blake made a vow, to protect, to stay, and for once, to face the storm he'd created head-on. The grand iron gates of the Morgan estate creaked open, revealing the sprawling mansion beyond, a structure of symmetry, wealth, and silence. But as Nathaniel's sleek black limousine pulled into the circular drive, that silence was about to be shattered. Inside the vehicle, 5 wide-eyed children pressed their faces against the tinted windows, their breath fogging the glass in fascination. Arya gasped. It's like a castle. Miles's eyes darted to the towering columns. Do you think there's a secret passage? Nathaniel, sitting across from them, watched quietly, his tailored suit a contrast to their second-hand winter coats. He'd walked into boardrooms with presidents and kings, but never had he been this nervous. These weren't business partners. They were his children. When the doors opened, Mrs. Palmer, his longtime housekeeper, stood stiffly in the grand foyer, her lips drawn tight at the sight of the newcomers. Mr. Morgan, she began, her eyes scanning the quintuplets. They'll be staying here for a while, Nathaniel said softly. They're my family. The word felt foreign and sacred on his tongue. As they stepped inside, the children's awe turned cautious. Their sneakers squeaked on polished marble floors, and their gazes lifted to chandeliers that looked like floating galaxies. Ezra ran his fingers along a curved banister, and Leo studied the architecture with the Leo-analytical gaze Nathaniel had seen in the mirror for years. Your home is bigger than our whole building, Miles whispered, half in wonder, half in fear. It's yours too now. At least for a while, Nathaniel replied, forcing steadiness into his voice. The children followed him through the mansion like shadows, not touching, not speaking, like guests afraid to make noise. When they reached the sunken living room, Nathaniel gestured toward a long, plush sectional couch. Make yourselves comfortable, he said. They sat gingerly, as if the cushions might bite. Arya folded her hands in her lap. Luca crossed his arms and sat furthest from Nathaniel. Leo looked around the room, already cataloging exits and shelves. Ezra opened his backpack and pulled out a worn chessboard. "Would anyone like hot chocolate?" Nathaniel asked. Aria's eyes lit up, but she said nothing. Leo nodded politely. "I'll have it sent in," Nathaniel said, stepping out to speak with Mrs. Palmer. Behind him, he could hear Miles whispering, "Do you think he's really our dad?" The question pierced him. Minutes later, a tray arrived bearing 5 mugs of steaming hot chocolate, each topped with whipped cream and sprinkles. For a moment, the mansion became warm, not because of its heating system, but because of the small sound of joy. "Oh my gosh," Aria whispered, her smile blooming. "It has sprinkles." Nathaniel sat opposite them, watching 5 faces that looked like echoes of his own past. He noticed how Aria held her mug with both hands like a treasure, how Miles dunked his marshmallows first, how Leo watched to see how everyone else behaved before taking a sip. Then there was Luca. He didn't drink. He didn't speak. He only stared at Nathaniel with hard, unreadable eyes. Nathaniel smiled gently. "Luca, are you okay?" The boy shrugged. "We're not staying long. Just until Mom gets better." The room fell still. Nathaniel nodded slowly. "Of course. As long as you need." But inside, something twisted. He didn't want them to leave. Not now. Not after this crack in his world had shown him what he'd been missing. These children, his children, were turning his hollow mansion into a home. He looked around at the laughter, the spilled whipped cream, the mismatched socks on expensive rugs. And for the first time in years, Nathaniel Blake didn't see chaos. He saw life. The kind that had been missing since he walked away from Claire Bennett all those years ago. Luca's stare didn't soften, but Nathaniel met it head-on. This wouldn't be easy. But then again, nothing worth keeping ever was. The Morgan mansion had never known chaos. For years, it had been a monument to silence, orderly, pristine, and cold. But now, it echoed with the unpredictable rhythm of 5 10-year-olds discovering their temporary home. Nathaniel Blake, once a master of control, was learning to live in the blur of spilled cereal, mismatched socks, and endless questions. Each child brought with them not just noise, but a piece of Nathaniel he never knew was missing. He started with Miles. It was Saturday morning when Nathaniel found him in the garage, standing reverently beside the vintage Aston Martin he kept under a silk cover. Miles wasn't touching the car, but his fingers hovered just inches away, as if absorbing its energy. "She's beautiful," Miles whispered, awe in his voice. Nathaniel smiled and walked over. "Would you like to see the engine?" Miles's head snapped up. "Really? Really?" Nathaniel popped the hood, and together they leaned over the gleaming machinery. Miles's questions came fast, precise, informed, curious. Nathaniel was stunned. "How do you know so much?" he asked. Miles shrugged. "Mom got me books from the library. I like figuring things out." Nathaniel swallowed hard. He's me, he thought. Only smarter. Only braver. Later that afternoon, he wandered into his home office and found Leo seated at his desk, surrounded by unfiled documents and open drawers. "Need something?" Nathaniel asked. "No, I'm organizing this," Leo replied without looking up. "Your system is inefficient." Nathaniel arched a brow. "Is that so?" Leo launched into a detailed explanation of how alphabetical systems could be optimized by tagging documents by relevance and urgency. He spoke with such confidence that Nathaniel just stood there, stunned. "I started my first business at 11, Nathaniel said finally. "You might beat me by a year." Leo smirked, just a little, but said nothing. Later, in the library, Nathaniel discovered Ezra at the antique chessboard. The pieces were perfectly arranged, his small fingers already planning their first move. You play? Nathaniel asked. Ezra nodded. Mom taught me. Care for a game? What followed was a quiet battle of wits. Ezra played methodically, thinking 3 moves ahead. Halfway through, he sacrificed his queen with stunning accuracy, and 5 moves later, checkmate. Nathaniel leaned back, stunned. Where'd you learn that? Ezra looked up, his voice quiet. Just saw it. That night, thunder cracked the sky. Nathaniel, half asleep, heard a soft knock at his bedroom door. It was Arya, hugging a worn teddy bear. Her eyes were wide with fear. I don't like storms, she whispered. Nathaniel kneeled. I used to be scared of them, too. Come here. He led her to the window seat and showed her how to count the seconds between the flash and the boom. The farther the count, the farther away it is. She nestled against him, counting out loud. Then, quietly, she asked, Are you really our father? Nathaniel froze. Yes, he said softly. I am. Why weren't you there? Her question was simple, but it struck like lightning. Because I was scared, Nathaniel admitted. And selfish. And I missed everything that mattered. Arya was silent, thinking. Mom says everyone deserves a second chance if they're really sorry. Nathaniel kissed the top of her head, overwhelmed. She's the wisest person I know. Only Luca kept his distance. He watched Nathaniel with arms folded, his expressions unreadable. Every gesture Nathaniel made toward him was met with cool silence. No smiles. No thank yous. Just the icy wall of a boy who had learned too early not to trust. Nathaniel didn't push. Instead, he stood in the hallway that night, looking at 5 bedroom doors. Behind each one, a different child, a different version of himself. 4 were beginning to open their hearts. But the 5th? The 5th would take time. And Nathaniel knew, he would wait as long as it took. Nathaniel Blake was jolted awake by the shrill ring of his phone. His heart pounded as he fumbled to answer. On the other end, a clinical voice delivered the news with practiced detachment. Claire had suffered a severe respiratory episode. She was being rushed to the ICU. Nathaniel was already out of bed, grabbing his coat as he replied, I'll be right there. Down the hall, the mansion was quiet, blanketed in shadows. Mrs. Palmer appeared in her robe, already awake from the commotion. Her face was pale but composed. The children, Nathaniel began. I'll watch over them, she said gently. You go. The drive to the hospital was a blur of red lights and dread. Nathaniel's mind reeled with worst-case scenarios. The woman he had once loved and left, the mother of his children, could he lose her just when he had found her again? Outside the ICU, Dr. Chen met him with a grave expression beneath her surgical mask. She's critical, she said. Her lungs are rapidly deteriorating. We need to perform emergency surgery. It's her only shot. Do it. Whatever it takes. I don't care what it costs, Nathaniel said without hesitation. It's not about the cost, Dr. Chen replied softly. It's about whether her body can handle the trauma. Nathaniel looked through the glass into Claire's room. She lay still, a pale silhouette surrounded by machines. Tubes snaked into her nose, chest rising and falling with visible effort. She's the strongest person I've ever known, Nathaniel whispered. She'll make it. Hours later, as dawn approached, he returned home only long enough to break the news to the children. He gathered them in the living room, still wearing his wrinkled coat, his eyes hollow from worry. Arya was the first to speak, her voice trembling. Is Mommy going to die? Nathaniel knelt before them. He could barely hold their gazes, especially Luca's. The doctors are doing everything they can, he said. She's very sick, but she's also very strong. Like all of you. Silence fell. Then Luca stepped forward, his arms folded tightly across his chest. His jaw clenched with the kind of fear children shouldn't have to carry. "We should be with her," he said firmly. "You will be," Nathaniel promised. "After surgery. We'll go see her together." That afternoon, the children waited in the hospital lounge, too exhausted for games, too scared for words. Nathaniel paced, hands shaking, mind spinning. He couldn't sit still. He couldn't breathe properly. Finally, Luca stood beside him. The boy's face was tight with unspoken emotion. "She can't die," he said bluntly. Nathaniel turned, surprised by the rawness in his voice. "You weren't there when she stayed up all night helping us with homework," Luca went on, his voice cracking. "Or when she worked double shifts just so we could have presents at Christmas. Or when she sang us 5 different lullabies every night." Nathaniel didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. What could he say? "You're right," he said quietly. "I missed everything." Luca swallowed hard. "If she doesn't make it." He couldn't finish. Nathaniel reached out, gently placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "She's fighting," he said softly. "And I'm not going anywhere. Not this time." To his surprise, Luca didn't pull away. His shoulders trembled, but he stayed. Hours later, the surgeon emerged. "She made it," he announced. "It was close, but she pulled through." Relief hit Nathaniel like a wave. He exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. The children rushed to Claire's side. One by one, they whispered their love, their promises to help her get better. Nathaniel stood in the background, watching the mother he had abandoned now surrounded by 5 lives she had built alone. Then, just as he turned to leave, Luca approached him again. "Thank you," he said simply. Nathaniel blinked, stunned. "For what?" he asked. "For not leaving when it got scary." Nathaniel swallowed the lump in his throat. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the first step. "I'm not leaving again," he said. "Not ever." And this time, he meant it. The conference room atop Morgan Motors headquarters buzzed with confusion. Executives glanced at one another, murmuring in disbelief as Nathaniel Blake, their CEO and founder, walked in precisely at 8 a.m. But something was different. He wasn't carrying a sleek presentation or a quarterly report. He wasn't even wearing a tie. Nathaniel stood at the head of the long glass table, his gaze sharp but weary, his voice low but resolute. "I'm stepping back," he said. A stunned silence fell over the room. "I'll still be involved, but starting today, I'm delegating daily operations to the executive team. I'll be working remotely, 3 days a week. My availability will shift depending on family needs." Whispers broke out. The CFO leaned forward, blinking. "Nathaniel, the Tokyo expansion will proceed under Jacob's lead," Nathaniel interrupted, nodding at his longtime second-in-command. "I've trained you all for years. You're ready. It's time I focus on something I neglected for far too long." "Is this about the kids?" someone ventured, hesitantly. Nathaniel didn't flinch. "It's about my children." "Yes. And their mother, Claire. She's in the hospital. And those 5 kids, my kids, are living with me now. I can't miss another moment." Shock rippled across the table like a tidal wave crashing into decades of boardroom tradition. Nathaniel Blake, the man who once fired a VP for missing a flight to close a deal, was rescheduling meetings for school pickups? A few heads nodded with understanding. Others stared as if he were a stranger in a familiar shell. But Nathaniel didn't care. He walked out of the meeting without his usual stack of projections or his phone glued to his hand. Instead, he drove straight to the Morgan mansion, now a makeshift family sanctuary, and stepped into a living room littered with coloring books, chess pieces, and half-finished science projects. Mrs. Palmer, his longtime housekeeper, greeted him with a faintly amused smile. "Leo reorganized your filing cabinet again," she said. "And Miles is in the garage asking if he can take the Aston Martin apart." Nathaniel smiled. "Good. I'll help him. But first, I need to check on Claire's room." That room, the newly renovated East Wing, had once been reserved for visiting dignitaries. Now, it was being transformed into a healing space, bright natural light, medical-grade equipment hidden within custom cabinetry, bookshelves filled with both classic novels and children's stories, a reclining chair by the window where Claire could watch the children play. Nathaniel supervised every detail personally. "I want her to feel at peace," he told the interior designer. "Like it's her home. Not a hospital." He approved every lamp, every thread count, every oxygen stand disguised as modern art. It wasn't about impressing anyone, it was about redemption. That evening, he stood beside Claire's hospital bed. She looked better. Her cheeks had more color, and the wheeze in her lungs had softened. "You skipped your investor call," she murmured, raising an eyebrow behind her oxygen mask. "I had more important things to do," Nathaniel said softly. Claire studied him for a long moment. "You've changed." "I'm changing," he corrected. "Not for show. Not for guilt. Because I want to. Because I should have years ago." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Not temporary?" "No," he said, kneeling beside her bed, his voice breaking. "I'm not leaving again. This isn't a detour. It's my new path." That night, back home, Nathaniel walked the halls of his mansion, now echoing with the life he'd never dared to imagine. Laughter from the den. A light left on in the library. The quiet hum of 5 small souls asleep upstairs. For the first time in decades, Nathaniel Blake wasn't chasing profit. He was chasing time. Time to make up for everything he'd missed. And this time, he wouldn't run. The winter sun spilled golden light through the towering windows of the Morgan mansion, warming the polished marble floors and chasing shadows into corners. Nathaniel stood at the center of the living room, watching the transformation unfold around him, children's laughter echoing through halls once cold and silent, toys scattered across Persian rugs, smudges of crayon on walls that had once been pristine. His world had been immaculate, controlled, and void of warmth. But now? Now it felt alive. Claire's wheelchair rolled quietly across the threshold, oxygen tank trailing behind like a reluctant companion. Her first-day visit since being discharged for short supervised outings was finally here, and though she masked it well, Nathaniel could see the tension in her shoulders as she took in the place. "You've rearranged the living room," she noted, her voice steadier than it had been weeks ago. Nathaniel offered a small smile. "The kids needed a space that felt like theirs. I think I did too." She scanned the room, her sharp blue eyes lingering on the small library corner where Ezra had stacked his chess books, the arts and crafts table Arya had claimed, and the family calendar now dominated by school projects and playdates. The formal order he once valued had been gently overturned by life and love. Her gaze landed on the far wall, and something in her expression shifted. "Are those?" "Yes," Nathaniel replied before she could finish. "They're the kids' drawings. Luca's idea. He said you should be surrounded by our history, even the parts one missed." Claire's lips parted, surprise flickering across her face. That Luca, the most guarded of their children, had suggested such a thing felt almost impossible. And yet, the evidence was there, scotch-taped and uneven, 5 crayon portraits labeled family, each one evolving in artistic skill and emotional clarity. A silence settled over them, filled only by the hum of the oxygen concentrator and the sound of children playing somewhere upstairs. Nathaniel gestured toward the sun-drenched armchair beside the fireplace, the one he'd insisted the staff move closer to the windows for her visit. "Come sit. Let me get you your tea." He returned moments later with her favorite blend, chamomile with just a splash of honey, and watched as she took a sip, her eyes never leaving the drawings. "They're different now," she said softly. "Happier." Nathaniel sat beside her, nodding. "You've given them everything. I'm just trying to catch up." She turned to look at him then, really look. Her expression was unreadable for a beat too long. "It doesn't happen all at once, Nathaniel. Trust doesn't come back with furniture rearrangements and hot chocolate. Not from me, and definitely not from them." "I know," he said, quietly but firmly. "But I'm not going anywhere. Not again." From upstairs came the sound of thundering footsteps, and then 5 small bodies tumbled down the staircase, their energy filling the room like a tidal wave. "Mom! Mom! Come see what we built!" Arya called out. "Blanket fort," Miles announced proudly, waving his arms like a ringmaster. Claire looked at Nathaniel with raised eyebrows. "Blanket fort?" He chuckled. "Entire living room. I may never get my coffee table back." She let out a soft, genuine laugh, a sound Nathaniel hadn't heard in over a decade. "I want to see it." As the children swarmed around her chair, guiding her with careful hands and proud chatter, Nathaniel hung back. He watched her smile, watched their children glow in her presence, and felt a tightening in his throat. Then, as she reached the edge of their makeshift fortress, Luca turned around and said, "Dad helped too." The word struck Nathaniel like a lightning bolt, sharp, unexpected, and electrifying. He met Luca's eyes across the room. The boy's expression wasn't quite warm, but it wasn't shut off anymore. It was a beginning. Nathaniel took a slow breath, heart pounding against ribs that hadn't known this kind of ache before. The walls around him, both literal and emotional, were falling. And for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't afraid. The hospital room was quiet, save for the gentle hum of medical equipment and the occasional chirp of monitors. Claire sat upright in bed, propped by soft pillows, her oxygen tube resting beneath her nose. The quintuplets gathered around her, seated on chairs and the edge of the bed, their identical faces reflecting varying degrees of curiosity, concern, and confusion. Nathaniel stood nearby, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times. Yet now, with all 5 children looking at him expectantly, the words felt heavier than ever. Claire reached for Arya's hand and drew a steady breath. "Kids," she began gently, her voice steadier than Nathaniel expected, "there's something very important we need to tell you, about Mr. Morgan." 5 pairs of eyes shifted toward Nathaniel in unison. He felt their weight, the pressure of truth demanding to be spoken. "Mr. Morgan," Claire continued, her hand trembling slightly in Arya's, "isn't just the man who bought your toy car. He's your father." A beat of stunned silence followed. It stretched across the room like a chasm. "Our what?" Luca was the first to speak, his voice flat and disbelieving. "Your father," Claire said again, her eyes locking with each child in turn. "Nathaniel and I were together a long time ago, in college. You were born after he left. He didn't know about you, and I chose not to tell him." Miles's brow furrowed. "But why? Why didn't you tell us?" Nathaniel stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Because I wasn't ready," he admitted. "Back then, I was selfish. I had dreams of building a company, of becoming something big. I thought love and family would slow me down, so I ran." "You ran from Mom?" Leo asked, eyebrows raised, the analyst in him already dissecting the betrayal. "Yes," Nathaniel said, swallowing hard. "I ran from your mother. I didn't know she was pregnant. But I know that's not an excuse. I should have stayed. I should have been there from the start." Ezra looked down at his hands, his silence louder than any question. Arya, her eyes glossy, whispered, "Are you going to leave again?" Nathaniel dropped to one knee in front of them, his voice cracking. "No. I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. I missed 10 years I can never get back. But I want to be in your lives now, if you'll let me. I want to try, to be your dad. Luca stood abruptly, his arms folded, a scowl etched across his face. You think you can just show up and fix it? With money and promises? Nathaniel met his glare with quiet honesty. No. I don't think this can be fixed with money. Or even with words. But I'll spend every day proving I deserve a chance. I don't expect you to forgive me, Luca. Not now. Maybe not ever. But I'll be here, no matter what. The tension in the room was thick. Miles looked to his siblings, then to Claire, then back at Nathaniel. So, what do we call you? He asked slowly. Do we have to call you Dad now? Nathaniel shook his head gently. You can call me whatever makes you feel safe. I haven't earned Dad. Not yet. The children exchanged glances. 5 mirrors of the Leo genes, but 5 entirely different reactions: Luca's mistrust, Leo's calculation, Miles's tentative curiosity, Ezra's quiet ache, and Aria's cautious hope. I think, Aria said softly, walking to Nathaniel and placing a hand on his shoulder, I'd like to try calling you Dad. Just once. To see what it feels like. Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. He nodded slowly, tears pressing behind his eyes. That would mean more than you know. In that fragile moment, surrounded by children he never knew and a woman he never stopped loving, Nathaniel Blake began the hardest journey of his life, not to claim a title, but to earn it. Nathaniel Blake had spent years mastering business mergers and multi-million-dollar negotiations. But nothing in his career prepared him for the delicate, unpredictable world of parenting 5 10-year-olds, especially ones who had every reason to mistrust him. Still, he was determined to earn what he had lost. Miles was the first to crack open his door, literally and figuratively. One Saturday morning, Nathaniel found him in the mansion's garage, staring at the vintage silver Aston Martin like it was a sacred relic. The boy didn't touch, just hovered, his fingers trembling inches above the polished hood. She's beautiful, Miles whispered, reverent. Nathaniel smiled, moved by the boy's awe. Would you like to see the engine? Miles's eyes widened, hope and disbelief warring on his face. Can I? Absolutely. As Nathaniel lifted the hood, he expected simple curiosity, but Miles's questions were anything but ordinary. He asked about horsepower, torque ratios, even engine cooling systems. How do you know so much? Nathaniel asked, genuinely stunned. Miles shrugged, like it was no big deal. I just like figuring out how things work. Mom got me books on engines from the library when I was 7. Nathaniel's chest tightened. He remembered being that Leo boy once, only with his father dismissing his obsession as a waste of time. I used to be just like you, he said softly. Except no one ever encouraged me. Miles looked up at him, something unspoken passing between them. For the first time, Nathaniel felt a bond forming, real and raw. Later that afternoon, he discovered Leo in his home office, reorganizing a pile of financial reports with surgical precision. Mrs. Palmer said these needed filing, Leo explained, not bothering to look up. Your system wasn't very efficient. Nathaniel bit back a laugh. Oh? What would you recommend? Without missing a beat, Leo launched into a detailed explanation on categorical versus chronological organization, complete with color coding and index tab suggestions. Nathaniel watched in amazement. You know, he said, leaning on his desk, I started my first business at 11, detailing cars for neighbors. Leo glanced up, curiosity flickering in his intelligent eyes. Did it make money? Enough to launch the next idea, Nathaniel said with a wink. Want to see how Morgan Motors builds quarterly projections? Leo's eyes lit up. For a boy so serious, that one smile was a revelation. In the mansion's private library, Nathaniel stumbled upon Ezra quietly arranging pieces on an antique chessboard. Do you play? Nathaniel asked, surprised. Mom taught me, Ezra said. She's really good. Care for a game? Nathaniel offered. Their match was silent, cerebral. Nathaniel found himself sweating as Ezra began predicting his moves. Then, checkmate. A perfect queen sacrifice. Nathaniel stared at the board in disbelief. Where did you learn that? I just saw it, Ezra said with a shrug. 3 moves ago. The pride Nathaniel felt was immediate, and a little humbling. But it was Arya who found his heart's most vulnerable place. A thunderstorm rolled through late one night, and Nathaniel awoke to soft knocking. Arya stood outside his door, clutching a tattered teddy bear. Her voice was barely a whisper. I don't like storms. They're too loud. Nathaniel knelt beside her. I used to be afraid of them too. My grandma taught me to count the seconds between lightning and thunder. Together, they sat by the window, whisper counting. As Arya relaxed into his side, she asked the question that haunted him. Are you really our father? He inhaled sharply. Yes. I am. Then why weren't you there, she whispered. For birthdays, or when we were sick. He cupped her small hand gently in his. Because I made the biggest mistake of my life. I was selfish and afraid. And I missed everything that truly matters. Arya didn't say anything for a while. Then, she whispered, Mom says everyone deserves a second chance, if they're really sorry. Nathaniel swallowed the lump in his throat. Then I hope to earn mine. 4 children were opening their hearts. But one, Luca, remained a fortress. Distant. Watching. Waiting. Nathaniel knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And beginnings, especially the painful, redemptive kind, always required more than love. They required time, truth, and consistency. Nathaniel Blake jolted awake, his heart thudding as he grabbed his vibrating phone from the nightstand. The voice on the other end was calm, clinical, even, but the words hit like a truck. Mr. Morgan, Claire Bennett has been admitted to the ICU. Her oxygen levels dropped dangerously low. We're prepping for emergency intervention. I'll be right there, Nathaniel said, already pulling on clothes with shaking hands. He found Mrs. Palmer, his longtime housekeeper, waiting outside his bedroom. She'd heard the phone call, and her lined face was pale under the hallway light. I'll watch the children, she said softly. Just go. Nathaniel nodded, unable to form words as he rushed out into the cold pre-dawn. The hospital corridors were quiet, unnaturally so. Every footstep echoed as Nathaniel raced toward the intensive care unit, his mind spinning with every possible worst-case scenario. Just hours ago, Claire had seemed stable. Weak, yes, but laughing with the kids, sipping her tea. He had let himself believe the worst was behind them. A surgeon met him outside room 304. The man's eyes were tired, his voice calm but edged with tension. She took a turn, Mr. Morgan. Acute respiratory failure. Her lungs aren't responding to the current course of treatment. We need to operate. Now. It's risky, but it's her best chance. Do it, Nathaniel said without hesitation. Do whatever it takes. It's not just about the procedure, the doctor cautioned. It's about whether she's strong enough to survive it. Nathaniel looked through the glass window. Claire lay unconscious, pale and fragile, surrounded by tubes and machines. Her chest rose and fell with labored effort. She's the strongest person I've ever known, Nathaniel said quietly. She'll make it. Back at the mansion, the children stirred as daylight broke. Arya was the first to notice Nathaniel hadn't returned. Luca, ever vigilant, picked up on the tension in Mrs. Palmer's voice as she prepared breakfast. Something was wrong. At 7:45 a.m., Nathaniel returned, not home, but to the people who now meant more to him than anything he'd ever built. He found the quintuplets huddled in the den, their faces pale and drawn. "Is Mom going to die?" Arya asked, her voice so small it broke him. Nathaniel sat beside them, looking at each of his children. His children. "She's very sick," he said gently. "The doctors are doing everything they can. She made it through the night, and she's fighting hard. We should be with her," Luca snapped, his voice cracking. "She needs us." "You will be," Nathaniel promised, placing a hand on Luca's shoulder. To his shock, Luca didn't flinch or pull away. Later that day, the family sat in a sterile ICU waiting room. The kids, who only weeks ago were strangers to this place, now felt like part of its fabric. Miles tried to distract Ezra with a card game. Leo stared at a magazine without flipping the page. Arya clutched a stuffed bear, silent tears running down her cheeks. And Luca stood at the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. "She can't die," he said suddenly. Nathaniel approached him quietly. "I know." "No, you don't." Luca's voice trembled now. "You weren't there when she worked double shifts or sang 5 different lullabies every night. You weren't there when she collapsed last month." "I missed everything," Nathaniel admitted. "But I'm here now. I'm not leaving again." Luca didn't answer. But he didn't walk away either. At 4:26 p.m., the surgeon returned. His face, at last, brought hope. "She made it," he said. "It was close, but she's stable. The next 48 hours are critical, but she has a fighting chance." The tension in the room broke like a dam. Arya sobbed into Leo's shoulder. Miles whispered a prayer. Nathaniel turned away, swallowing the sob that threatened to escape. Luca stepped closer, voice soft now. "Thank you." Nathaniel looked at him. "For what?" "For staying," Luca said. "For not running when it got scary." In that moment, Nathaniel didn't need a DNA test to know these kids were his. They were already family. Nathaniel Blake had once built an empire on certainty, measurable profits, scalable systems, quarterly goals. But in the weeks following Claire's surgery, he found himself navigating a world with no blueprint, no exit strategy, and no shareholders to impress. Only 5 small souls who needed more than money could ever buy, and one woman who had taught him, through her pain, what resilience truly meant. His mornings no longer started with investor calls, but with cereal bowls, mismatched socks, and the daily challenge of coaxing Luca out of bed without triggering a standoff. He used to thrive in boardrooms, now he found victories in packing lunchboxes without forgetting anyone's preference. Arya hated peanut butter. Ezra didn't like apples. Miles only ate the crusts if they were toasted. Leo had a thing about symmetrical sandwich cuts. Luca? He usually refused to eat unless Claire reminded him. But Claire wasn't home yet. Her recovery was steady but slow. The specialized hospital kept her under close supervision while the treatments continued to battle the scarring in her lungs. Every evening, Nathaniel visited her with new updates. Arya's book report got a gold star. Leo had organized the pantry alphabetically. Miles tried to fix the vacuum and short-circuited the entire second floor. Ezra won a chess match against Mrs. Palmer. Luca hadn't spoken more than 2 words to him, but he had started sitting closer at dinner. "You've rearranged your entire life for them," Claire observed during one of his nightly visits. Her voice was stronger, though her eyes still held the Leo mixture of awe and skepticism. "Do your investors know you missed the Tokyo expansion meeting because of a second-grade science fair?" Nathaniel adjusted her pillows gently. "They'll survive." "Miles's volcano demonstration?" "Not so much." She laughed softly, a sound he hadn't heard in years, and for a moment, he allowed himself to just sit in it, her smile, her presence, her stillness. He didn't tell her everything, though. He didn't mention how the mansion, once a symbol of power and isolation, had transformed. Business journals had been replaced by dog-eared parenting books. The hallway once echoing with silence now trembled with laughter, squabbles, and spontaneous dance battles led by Arya. The formal dining room had become a jungle of school projects, paper airplanes, and chess boards. Even Mrs. Palmer, his strict, stone-faced housekeeper, had changed. "Those children need green vegetables, Mr. Morgan," she scolded one night. "You can't bribe them with chocolate forever." Then she'd rearranged her own schedule to attend Ezra's chess match and ironed Arya's favorite dress for picture day. Nathaniel didn't recognize his life anymore. And he didn't want to. During a rare quiet evening, he wandered into the East Wing, the part of the house he'd redesigned as Claire's recovery suite. The walls were now lined with photos of the quintuplets. Luca had insisted they document everything: birthdays, school achievements, even the day Ezra finally beat Nathaniel at chess. "She should see what she built," Luca had said. "Even the parts you missed." Nathaniel had stood there, staring at the montage. So much life. So much love. All carried forward without him, and now, somehow, with him. Back at the hospital, Claire studied his expression as he sat beside her. "This isn't temporary, is it?" she asked quietly. "You're not just doing this until I get better." Nathaniel looked her in the eye, no bravado, no armor. "No," he said simply. "This is who I should have been all along." It wasn't a performance. It wasn't penance. It was purpose. For the first time in his adult life, Nathaniel Blake wasn't chasing wealth, but legacy, the kind written not in headlines or revenue charts, but in bedtime stories, bicycle rides, and the sound of 5 children calling a house their home. He didn't know what the future held. But he knew where it started. Here. With them. The late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy of willow branches as Nathaniel Blake walked beside Claire Bennett along the winding path behind the estate. Their footsteps were soft against the mossy earth, the air quiet save for the distant sound of children's laughter floating from the meadow where the quintuplets were flying handmade kites. The summer breeze rippled across the lake's surface ahead, casting dancing reflections of light across Claire's pale skin and the oxygen tubing that trailed beside her like a silent shadow. Nathaniel had been planning this walk for days. He remembered how much she'd always loved the water, the calm, the clarity, the way it mirrored the sky. And now, 10 years after walking away from her with nothing more than selfish ambition and a vintage toy car left behind, he hoped this place could offer something more than just nostalgia. He hoped it could offer a beginning. They stopped beneath the willow tree that draped over the lake's edge like a guardian of secrets. Nathaniel hesitated, hands shoved deep into his pockets, searching for the right words. Claire beat him to it. "You brought me here on purpose," she said, glancing sideways, her tone teasing but soft. He smiled faintly. "I did. You always found peace here." Claire's eyes turned to the lake, her expression unreadable. "I did. Still do. It's quiet. Honest. That's what I want with you," Nathaniel said quietly, stepping in front of her. "Honesty. Finally." She turned toward him fully now, her gaze expectant. Cautious. Her body still recovering, her heart more scarred than either of them had acknowledged. But she was here. Listening. "These months," he began, voice low but steady, "they've given me everything I never knew I needed. This family, our children, you. I used to think success was measured in acquisitions and margins. But I've never felt richer than I did when Arya called me Dad." Claire's expression softened, but her guard stayed up. "We've come a long way, Nathaniel. But that doesn't erase the past." "I'm not trying to erase it," he said, taking a slow step closer. "I'm trying to own it. And rebuild from it. If you'll let me." A silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant chirp of cicadas and the rustle of branches. Nathaniel pulled in a breath, then said the words he'd rehearsed 100 times but never dared to speak until now. I never stopped loving you, Claire. Not really. Even when I buried it under ambition and fear. Even when I convinced myself that walking away was the right thing. It wasn't. It was the biggest mistake of my life. She blinked, startled by the rawness in his tone. For a moment, she didn't speak. Her hand tightened on the handle of her portable oxygen cart, the weight of history trembling behind her eyes. And now? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Now, he said, stepping beside her, I want a second chance. Not just as a co-parent. But as a man who finally understands what matters. I'm not asking to pick up where we left off. I'm asking for something new. Something real. Small steps. Dinner. Conversation. Time. Claire's eyes shimmered with something between fear and hope. Her fingers twitched as though reaching for something invisible. Nathaniel held out his hand. Just one small step today. For a beat, she said nothing. Then, slowly, her fingers curled around his. The contact sent a shock through him, warmth, memory, promise. Small steps, she echoed, her voice stronger now. We owe it to the kids. And maybe, to ourselves. From across the field came the echo of Miles's voice, calling out for a kite that had broken loose. Claire smiled for the first time in days. Nathaniel didn't look away from her. In her eyes, he saw everything he had lost, and everything he still had a chance to reclaim. And as their hands remained joined beneath the willow, he realized, this wasn't just the beginning of a new chapter. It was the chance to write the ending differently. Together. The Morgan estate had never looked more alive. Where once the grand gardens had been showcases for business events and elite fundraisers, today they bloomed with meaning. White roses lined the aisle, their petals trembling in the breeze like nervous whispers. Silver ribbons fluttered from the chairs arranged in a perfect semicircle around a floral arch, beneath which Nathaniel Blake now stood, no longer just a CEO, but a father, a partner, a man transformed. The vintage toy car, once traded for survival, now polished and gleaming, rested atop a pedestal beside the arch. It wasn't just decoration. It was testimony. Proof that a broken past could still lead to something whole. Are you nervous? Miles asked, adjusting his bow tie with the unpracticed hands of an 11-year-old trying to be a man. Nathaniel smiled down at his son, fixing the boy's slightly crooked collar. Terrified, he admitted. But in the best possible way. The other children hovered nearby, each mirroring some piece of Nathaniel and Claire's legacy. Leo, pragmatic as ever, double-checked the seating chart. Ezra stood quietly, a small, folded speech clutched in his hand just in case he was asked to say something. Arya spun in her flower girl dress, excitement radiating off her like sunlight. And Luca, stoic, guarded, unreadable, watched it all in silence. I still can't believe Mom said yes, Leo muttered, half to himself, half to the group. I can, Arya replied confidently, beaming. She smiles differently when he's around now. Like she finally remembers what happy feels like. Ezra nodded in agreement. They both do. Nathaniel knelt in front of them, adjusting shoelaces and calming nerves, but when he looked at Luca, he paused. Of all the children, his journey had been the hardest. Trust had not come easily, nor should it have. Luca, Nathaniel began gently, I know this day changes a lot. But I want you to know something. Luca cut him off, not rudely, but with clarity. I know, he said, meeting Nathaniel's eyes. Mom deserves this. We all do. The statement struck Nathaniel like a blessing, unspoken forgiveness wrapped in boyish resolve. The string quartet began to play. Guests rose. Nathaniel turned, and time seemed to collapse around him. Claire Bennett appeared at the head of the garden path, not in white, but in a flowing dress the color of dawn. She walked slowly, unaided, her oxygen tank discreetly tucked behind a hedge for after the ceremony. The woman who had once fought for every breath now radiated quiet power. Every eye turned to her, but Nathaniel only saw the girl he fell in love with, and the woman who had raised his children into something magnificent. His heart thundered as she reached the arch. The vows were simple, not scripted but spoken from a place deep and bruised and healing. 10 years ago, I walked away out of fear, Nathaniel said, voice trembling but clear. Today, I walk toward you, toward us, out of gratitude and love. Claire reached for his hands. Our path was never straight. But it led us here, stronger, wiser, and surrounded by the 5 miracles who carried a piece of you inside them when I thought I'd never see you again. When they exchanged rings, Arya stepped forward with the restored toy car and placed it in their joined hands. No one spoke. No one needed to. The quintuplets cheered the loudest. 5 voices, once filled with confusion and pain, now joined in celebration. Later, as twilight wrapped the estate in soft gold, Nathaniel stood with Claire at the edge of the garden, watching their children laugh, dance, and create memories in the very place he'd once thought would remain empty forever. Any regrets? She teased, her hand brushing his. Only about the time we lost, he replied, his voice thick with emotion. Never about finding my way back to you. And in that moment, surrounded by roses, laughter, and the family he nearly lost, Nathaniel Blake finally understood, this was the success that mattered most. The late afternoon sun spilled golden light across the Morgan estate, casting long shadows over the freshly trimmed hedges and vibrant garden beds. Inside the mansion, the air was filled with the scent of lavender and lemon polish, though the order and stillness that once defined the house had long given way to a new kind of rhythm, one composed of laughter, footsteps racing down the hall, and the hum of a family in motion. Nathaniel stood silently in the living room, dressed down in jeans and a soft blue sweater, worlds apart from the suits he used to wear like armor. His gaze settled on the glass display case that held the restored Morgan Aeromax toy car, its polished frame gleaming under the chandelier. A small plaque beneath it read, "Second chances begin with recognizing first mistakes." It was more than decoration. It was a monument to everything that had changed. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Luca standing in the doorway, his arms crossed but his expression softer than it had ever been. "I remember when Mom showed us that," Luca said quietly, nodding toward the case. "She said it was special. That it was given with love, even if that love got lost along the way." Nathaniel walked over, standing beside him. In the reflection of the glass, he could see both their profiles, nearly identical, and yet a lifetime apart. "She was right," Nathaniel said. "It was the only part of me you ever had, until now." Luca was quiet for a moment. Then, almost shyly, he glanced at Nathaniel and asked, "Would you help with my writing assignment tomorrow? It's for English. We have to write about what family means." Nathaniel's heart thudded in his chest. "I'd be honored," he said, voice thick with emotion. He didn't try to smile. He didn't try to say more. The invitation, however small, was sacred. Later that night, as the house settled into its evening quiet, Nathaniel moved through the halls, checking in on each of his children. In Miles's room, books about engines and mechanics were stacked neatly beside the bed. In Leo's, a color-coded calendar detailed his mock business plans. Ezra's desk was covered in chess puzzles and hand-drawn maps. Arya was already asleep, hugging the teddy bear Nathaniel had won for her at a school fair. At last, he paused outside Luca's room. The door was open just enough to see the boy seated at his desk, writing by the glow of a lamp. Nathaniel didn't enter. He stood still, allowing the sight to wash over him like redemption. This was his son, his stubborn, brilliant, guarded son, giving him a sliver of trust. The mansion, once a fortress of solitude, was now full of messy love and second chances. It echoed with footsteps, laughter, arguments over toothpaste, and whispered stories under blanket forts. The sterile elegance had faded, replaced by school art projects pinned to walls and mismatched socks tumbling out of laundry baskets. Claire, still recovering but stronger by the day, had told him just last week, "It feels like this house has a heartbeat now." She was right. The Morgan estate was no longer just property. It was a home. As Nathaniel turned toward his bedroom, he stopped for one last glance at the toy car in the display case. What once symbolized his greatest mistake now marked the beginning of everything that truly mattered. His empire, his cars, his billions, they were nothing compared to the 5 children sleeping under his roof and the woman whose forgiveness had rewritten his future. He wasn't the man he once was. And he never would be again. Nathaniel Blake hadn't just reclaimed his family. He had finally earned the right to call it his. We'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and rate this story from 1 to 100. Tell us where you're watching from too. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking on the end screen now.